Thanks to Thompson tonight for hosting. Thanks to Kevin Clark. Thanks to Dan Regard, if he's still in the room. Dan was actually my boss for almost a decade. We worked together for a long, long time. Traveled a lot of the world, traveled a lot of this country doing discovery and data privacy. And I don't think I've ever spoken after him. So this is kind of, I was usually the opening act, so I don't know. It's kind of a little strange. But thanks to Dan. As you will see, my presentation will not have the bells and whistles of Mr. Regards. I'm more of a lawyer by background. Dan is much more tech savvy, and I can tell you stories, but I'll bore you about that. So we're going to talk about something I've never talked about in public before, biometric information. So this is a new presentation. It seems to be coming up. I do a lot of privacy work, starting to get a lot of questions, similar to the other privacy conundrums. There's state laws, there's federal laws, there's international laws. What do we do? I don't know if anybody here practices in this space. It's probably most applicable to employment law, in-house general counsel, kind of what we're going to talk about. And then there's just the creepiness factor of all this. What other countries are doing, which might scare you, or you'll be like, cool. I'm always on the freaked out paranoid side, but then other people are like, I don't care. And I'll share some statistics from a Northwestern study about your psychology and how you're okay with biometric data or how you're not. So we're gonna, if I can find my little clicker here, which I guess we won't need. 1 second. And I'm assuming we can, if you have questions, ask them. I'll try to answer them. Some of you may be involved in some of these cases. So what are we talking about with biometric information? Facial recognition, thumbprints. There's also characteristics of your hand's curve, which I learned about. Seems a little weird. Retina scans, your genetic makeup, your gait, how you walk can be identifiable to you, apparently just as much as your thumbprint is. Your voice, they can determine who you are by your voice recognition patterns, how you speak, volume. We could have probably made this list, I could have made this list a lot longer, but that's kind of what we're generally talking about. Things that you give off by your presence that aren't necessarily a number, that aren't necessarily your mailing address or your email. So the playing field, I mentioned this earlier, we have state issues, federal issues, and European Union issues. We're going to, where this all started was with Illinois. So Illinois has, since 2008, which some people don't recognize, it's not new, has a Biometric Information Privacy Act. This is the first law. It was cutting edge law. Think of it as the CCPA before the CCPA. They claim, it was kind of under the radar. It got passed. You can go back and look. Not a lot of the big tech companies at the time knew about it. It kind of came into its own without a lot of fanfare. And recently, it's kind of got out of control. So that's why we're going to talk about what makes it unique. I attend an IAPP conference last fall, and there was the plaintiff's bar against the defense bar talking about the litigation of cases, and the number of cases is skyrocketing. There's about 200 pending cases on just BIPA. It's fun to say. Everybody say it, BIPA. See, it's fun to say. And, it's created there's not a lot of friends between the plaintiff's bar and the defense bar on this, and we'll explain kind of, even as a privacy advocate like I am, it's gotten a little out of control in my opinion. But it is what it is. And what makes it different is there's a private cause of action, and Illinois Supreme Court says you don't have to prove damages beyond they took it without following the law. So let me slow down and go through that slowly. And this is always the big, with the privacy laws in the United States, big companies are concerned about these private cause of actions where you don't have to prove you were damaged, you just have to prove the incident happened. And if you can do that, you get to a lawsuit, you can get to class certification, you can cause pain upon your employer or whatever. And a lot of this was happening. There's the case that set that standard was Six Flags was thumbprinting their employees for check-in. And they didn't get notice or consent to do that. And the argument was, hey, there was no harm. We can't really show any harm. And the Supreme Court said, no, just the fact that you did it without complying with the law, the notice and consent requirement, basically getting them to say, you can do this and telling them you're doing this, they can now sue you. And then that led to a plaintiff counsel's aha moment, and so that led to a lot of litigations against companies that do that for their employees, right? A lot of them, they got rid of time cards and they went to some sort of biometric thumbprint, eye scan. All that's in play now if you're a company that operates in Illinois with Illinois residents. I always found it interesting, all the big lawyers, I can be a little political here, how did they miss this? If you're outsourcing your GC or you had your big law firms that were supposed to be experts, many big companies did not meet this requirement. They did not give notice and consent. They just simply didn't inform their clients. And maybe with the CCPA, there seems to be a lot more dogged attention put on it. But at the same time, there seems to be a lot of lawyers missed a lot of opportunity here because it's not a hard requirement, but it's something you must do. And if not, boom, you're in litigation. So Illinois kind of set it, but if you're a national company, how do you build privacy policies or requirements around one state? And that kind of is the trend you'll see with the other privacy laws. Texas and Washington currently have a biometric mention of law, but they don't have that same automatic cause of action, right? You have to show real damages, and which is surprising because Texas is behind on other privacy areas, but they passed a law which there's not a lot to write home about. They have to show damages. It's going to have to be part of a breach. It's going to have to be sold, used nefariously. It's hard to get there. And then Florida and Massachusetts right now, as of 2020, have pending in their House legislations biometric related, where they define biometric information, require certain security around it. But again, no private cause of action simply for violating it. And then California, if you were here earlier, the CCPA, the new law that was in effect January 1 this year, so it's law now, even though it seems to change weekly, is they treat biometric information as personal information, which is a term of art under the CCPA. And they have a broad definition. That's where gait. I always found that, I didn't know they could judge who you were by your walk, but apparently you can. Digital presence. So CCPA treats biometric information like other personal data, meaning if you have a database of personal information, biometric, and somebody wants access, wants to delete it, wants to know why you have it, you have to tell them. You have to be able to, you can't sell it without letting them opt out of it. So all the things that come with the CCPA, you have to give notice in your privacy policy. It just falls under personal data. So we'll see how that affects it. But again, no, it's still not Illinois. It's still not that fear of the cause of action. Is there going to be a federal law? No. That's my take on almost all privacy laws. Again, I work for myself. I have my own company, so I can say this. The lobbyists own the federal government. It's harder for them to overcome state laws. And so all your federal privacy laws you hear written about, they're not anywhere near close to happening. I don't want to explain all that why. So the CCPA, the BIPA, in the past, big tech kind of wasn't aware of what was going on. Same way they handled Washington and New York's privacy laws last year. Everybody thought those were going to be next, and they all got squashed real quick by some of the big tech companies. So that's the ongoing game in that. European Union, so they treat biometric information. It falls into the GDPR framework. They talked, this is kind of the new thing, 2 weeks ago there was articles that they were going to ban facial recognition use for 5 years while they studied it. And everybody kind of got in an uproar. As of Monday, they're not banning it for 5 years while they study it. They're going to study it, and they're going to kind of impose a select group of people to figure out whether or not they should be used and what it should be used for and what kind of notice you want to give. So that was kind of a dodge, if that's your company's thing, is to, they're not going to be in that 5-year ban unless they change their mind again in a few weeks, which you never know. You still have to give notice if you deal with European residents of, you have to set the default to opt out. So if you're doing facial recognition, if you're a bank and you're scanning people's face when they're using your ATM card and it's a European resident, you have to, in theory, have a pop-up that says, we're going to take a picture of your face. Do you agree or not? That's kind of the level they would want. So yeah, we'll watch it. European Union changes frequently on this topic. They want to take on the big tech companies, but they don't want to hinder all small businesses from operating. So they're constantly caught there. China, they're leading the way in this technology, and this is where we can get into the creepy stuff. So China's using facial recognition today to quarantine coronavirus patients. Okay, so they have their database, and they run your pictures. They also rate their citizenship using facial recognition by how often you go to political gatherings, what political gatherings, how long you're at work. So you have a score if you're a Chinese resident of how good of a Chinese person you are based on biometric information. And so they can use that interface to do for for coronavirus, if you're on certain flights, they pull your photos, and if your photo pops up around town and you're supposed to be quarantined, they can send somebody to arrest you. Russia's also doing this as of this Monday. That technology's out there. Our police, Texas, Dallas's, Irving's police force has access to some of these databases. Orlando's been doing it. They'll take their photos and they'll run it across their warrant list, and then they'll go out, whenever you pop up, if you have an outstanding warrant, they can go find you and arrest you. So that's going on right now. And I'm going to say one more thing, and then go ahead, Dan.
I'm just going to say, at the border control does something similar to a biometric fingerprint for vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
You look at all the emissions from the vehicle, the different types of electrical signals, and use that as a unique fingerprint for that vehicle to see if it's going back and forth across the border.
Yeah, and it goes to your prior presentation. It's not email data. I mean, all this, a lot of the government entities, so like China's data program, as they call it, Brazil licensed it for Carnival. So they were trying to follow people, if they were certain, nefarious people or people on certain lists, they were now using China's technology to monitor everybody walking around the streets of Rio de Janeiro. And if you read your news today, the company that was in the news last week on 60 Minutes that has all your photos, they're an AI company. The guy did, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the company. Clearview. They just got breached today. I knew I was going to get that reaction. But just their customer list, they say. And if you've ever followed breaches, you know how that goes. The first 2 weeks, it's don't worry about it. Then it's maybe worry about it, and we're fixing it. And then it's, oh crap, we're bankrupt, right? And that's kind of the way it goes. But I read it today. You guys can Google it. But they did get the customer list of all the police departments, companies, anybody using that tool now is out there, so I'm assuming it's going to be coming up soon. So yeah, so that was interesting. There's always something in this field about every day that changes. So, for litigation purposes, I think anybody that's touching Illinois or dealing with companies that have employees in Illinois need to be aware of the private cause of action. The international scope and the use of governments on this facial recognition, I mean, their argument, one, they don't say they're pictures. They're like, we build a three-dimensional model of your face. It's really not your image. Okay, all right, if you've seen the tools, that's kind of what they do, but at the same point, kind of who are we kidding? And just being, but it is home. I mean, 6 local Dallas police departments use it as of last June I saw a study. And I think it's most, New Jersey, you can't use it. So there's certain states you can't use facial recognition for criminal enforcement in New Jersey, but most states you can. And it's becoming big business. Big companies are selling, goes back to you shouldn't be able to sell my data. There's companies selling your data, and the driver's license bureaus are the biggest culprits. They're giving access to all these companies, a lot of them to you. I'm using a little bit of overgeneralization, but not much, where they can then match up one database against the other. And the problem, we don't have time to go into bias because I'm going to kind of wrap up here. Most of the studies are, the matches are the most aired when it's people of color and women. So on the civil liberties point and the criminal justice point of view, you can see why certain advocates are not happy with the fact that the highest error rate, and we're talking 18 to 23% error rates, which is pretty high if you're going to take somebody's liberty from them, is people of color and women. So yes, you win the, and while you might be able to prove it wasn't you, it's going to ruin your day and maybe your weekend as you have to spend the night in jail because they mismatched you with a warrant claim. So the bias in these algorithms is another probably hour-long panel that we're not going to do right now. But that's one of the downsides, in addition to being one of the creepier things. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? So this is scary. It's, Big Brother. I'm also jaded, and I think there's probably nothing that we can do about it long term. So I guess my question is more from a consumer perspective and an individual than a legal perspective, which is there's so many things out there today where we voluntarily submit our biometric information, whether it's opening our iPhone or 23andMe. So what are the things that we should be looking for as just individuals to protect our own individual rights and yet still take advantage of the technology that's out there? I mean, are we just screwed on like 23andMe? Should we just never do it?
I would say you should never do 23andMe, but that's just me. I mean, but if I had a medical history in my family that's a genetic thing, then I'd probably be, it's a risk. You're balancing things. You're saying, maybe I have a genetic thing in my past and I want to know my kid might be able, and I have friends that have that. They're all for it. Me, I would never put my stuff into that database because I'm a paranoid freak about all this stuff because this is all I ever do. I'm not a good example, but yes, when you voluntarily give, or if you have notice or assume consent is something in America, it's not a thing in Europe. You're going to be giving over certain information. But for example, Target was monitoring behavior of information of people online, and this girl was 15 or 14 looking for baby stuff, and they sent an ad to her parents' address, and their parents found out she was pregnant because of this. Is that cool? No. Is Lowe's sitting there saying we're only looking for criminals and shoplifters and then changing their privacy policy one day before the CCPA where now they say they can use it for everything? Is that cool? I don't think so. So now they're monitoring eye level of shelves. They're monitoring you on the screen. You can be fine with it, but shouldn't they have to tell you they're doing it? That was first, back, and then we'll go to you.
So on 23andMe,
Yeah.
you could kind of screw yourself on the data as well. I go to my doctor, and I told him, I said, hey, I've got this information. Is this something that would help you effectively care for me better than you normally would? And he said, don't even show me the report, because anything on there shown to me could be listed as a pre-existing condition. It might not be covered by insurance in the future.
Huh. Sorry, go ahead.
I didn't think it was pre-existing until it was diagnosed as such.
My view on health insurance, anything you think that should be right, you're wrong.
With the facial recognition and the thumbprint, you're kind of stuck, because if you're working for the company, or you want to work for the company, if you decline that, then you don't get the job.
They're not supposed to be able to discriminate you about that. Yeah, if they, well, and it's simple. You just they have to notify you. That's on them. And then if they're going to share it with third parties in Illinois, you have to give them permission in writing, and it should be part of your job, kind of. But if they said you don't get this job because you won't accept this unknowingly, that would be a lawsuit.
That's like any disclaimer, when you buy software, you agree to it.
Yeah.
This long disclaimer, nobody ever reads. No telling what you're giving away. But if you say no, then you don't get the software.
Well, and that's changing with the cookie policies. Now they can't.
That's true.
They're breaking that. It's progressed. It's not perfect, but you can say no to most, and you can still access the site.
Facial recognition in an airport.
Yeah.
If you don't want that, then you can't fly anymore. You can't go into airports.
I have seen in China some companies designing facial alteration masks to dodge these things, where they'll attach something like under a new chin or something like that, and they'll walk through airports. You can find this so that you can fool the cameras. I mean, so you imagine in 10 years, you're going to have Burberry and Gucci designer face mask, and they're going to, yeah, it's going to be a whole thing. Yes, sir.
They actually have a company that sells glasses,
Yeah?
and the glasses interfere with the cameras.
Yeah.
So it blanks out the face.
Yeah. I mean, what most people care about in these Northwestern study is sex, money, and employment. They don't really care about it. That's what the studies show. They don't want to know, and they don't want their employer to know things that maybe they don't care if their neighbor knows, or they don't know if they're, but that's what it comes down to in the studies. People really want to protect that information. So, and they did it went on to say if you were able to go to like CVS and use a thumbprint to get a discount or a card, 32% said they'd be okay with the thumbprint, 78% said they'd be okay with a card. So the ID card's still a thing. People are less creeped out by that, even though it's kind of just identifying you to get the discounts. It took me a long time to find that stat, so I needed to throw it out there. Another question.
Just a comment. So, we're used to what we're aware of today, but technology is developing so quickly to enable people and organizations to passively collect information. Now you can collect someone's thumbprint from a picture.
Mm-hmm.
So there are capabilities to take that. There are novel DNA processing techniques. Phenotyping is one of them, where you can get a person's hair color, eye color, skin tone, background, which you couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago. So I think there are two areas that are still going to be rapidly changing, which is how easy it is to collect the information regardless, and the uses for the information and the information you can get from the base set of biometrics you're collecting.
And we know this from discovery. What does everything do? Let's just collect all the data and we'll figure out something to do with it later. That's what most of the privacy laws in Europe and everything are trying to avoid, right? You got to have a purpose, use the data only for that purpose, get rid of it when you're done with it, And that's kind of the GDPR in 3 sentences, and that's kind of the CCPA in 3 sentences. But you're right, I mean, the law's never gonna be ahead of technology. I can't think of an instance where that's happened. And I was hoping you would comment, especially on the Illinois piece.
Yeah, it's even worse than that in Illinois.
Thank you.
The law is so far behind technology, it's not even funny. When that law was passed in 2008, it had to do with financial transactions and phone cards. Nobody envisioned what it would be used for today. And the real problem is the statute includes not only biometric identifiers, but things derived from biometric identifiers. So think of this. Someone takes a measurement of your face, 64 different points of your facial geometry, and creates essentially a hash value. That hash value is unusable to anybody else. You can put it on the dark web, no one can do anything with it because outside of its environment, it's absolutely useless, completely secure by design, protects privacy and everything. Under the Illinois statute as currently written, that's a violation. So the law is way behind technology, even technology that's aimed at
And
security and privacy.
as a privacy advocate and as somebody that used to work with plaintiff, or I have a plaintiff client. I used to be a plaintiff lawyer 21 years ago. I agree this law goes too far, and I rarely say that. You know, it's been totally kind of taken. Al Cycli from Shook Hardy does a lot about this. He writes a lot about it. He was on the IP panel where they had the debate, and I was even like,
My neck in Illinois right now.
yeah, but it's fun to say. You can't lie. And I was hoping you'd comment, 'cause I know in Illinois. I mean, I saw you here. I'm like, Martin's gonna either agree with me or he's gonna come at. Yeah. We've hit our time. Go ahead. More questions is fine. Robert, I'm assuming will come get me. I don't know, but they.
Okay, so kind of from a individual standpoint, we've noted that a lot of this data is being collected passively. A lot of it is being volunteered. And we're kind of asking each individual to do a cost-benefit analysis of balancing risks and what they're giving up. But without like quantifying the actual value of this biometric data, how do we ask individuals to make that assessment?
I don't know if it's going to be a financial, like putting a dollar on it. I mean, there are studies I can tell you what a record's worth to these companies, but I don't think that's what you're getting at. I mean, it goes back a step. You got to we're kind of lost in this U.S. kind of legal system. It's like you as an individual should have rights in what somebody's doing with your information. If I take your picture and I go sell it, you can sue me. But I can take everything else about you and I don't even have to tell you. You know, that's where I kind of come from. It's like, just as an individual, you have rights to certain things. You can offer it, and if somebody wants to take it passively, they have to tell you about it, which by then it isn't passive. And they certainly shouldn't be able to profit, sell it to other countries, you know, that's where the risk goes way, this is my opinion. But yeah, it's an individual choice. Some people don't care. Some millennials don't care. My grandfather doesn't care. You know, they're just like, oh, whatever, I want to get the app and I want to do the thing. But when they're exposed to what's really going on with it, then they usually pull back a little bit. But just from movies, from books, just giving your thumbprint or your retina scan and not knowing where it's going is just kind of, you know, I don't want to do that. You know, I lie to all those companies about those cards. I don't give the same information to any one of them if I use them, you know. But yeah, I don't know how it's going to be a person, but it should be your choice. You should choose whether you care or not. It shouldn't just be done behind your back.
But doesn't whether you care, isn't that based on some kind of innate value assigned to this biometric data?
Yeah, if you have,
How do we quantify it?
I don't know if you quantify it. I think you just, if it's with your personal, if you're okay with it being out, and it's not I don't like the argument, well, I don't do anything wrong, I don't care. That's not a very good argument, because, you know, you might not do anything wrong, but your cousin could have killed somebody, and now they're going to end up in jail because you did 23andMe. I mean, there's a whole long kind of parade. Or, you know, they're a colored woman, and now they're going to be misrepresented, and then they're going to end up in jail, and they shouldn't be. I mean, whether it's an easy choice or a hard choice, it should be the individual's choice. Yep.
Just real quick, back to the Six Flags case.
Yeah.
With the notification and consent, I mean, if the employee walks in and they say, hey, we're gonna need you to to get a fingerprint on file, so that way you can have that as your timesheet, whatever. Okay, let's do this. Does that not kind of count as notification and consent? Because they know that they're logging in and they know what it's for.
Yeah.
So does that not?
They didn't notify how long they were keeping it or where they were keeping it.
Okay.
Martin, was that the trick?
It was actually visitors to the park that were plaintiff class. It was.
That's right. They had the rules for the employees, and they didn't apply it to the actual.
For your season pass for the amusement park, Six Flags, you had this little, you could access the park by putting your thumb on a access key, so you could just walk
Okay.
And it was Mrs. Rosenbach and her son that were the lead plaintiffs.
I knew.
Who were notified, and you also have to have a privacy
Policy, right.
that is made available to people before they even are presented with the choice of whether or not to opt in or opt out.
Yeah, it's got a same as CCPA now. You got to give it, they have to see it before they make their choice. They can't fill out everything and then you say, hey, are you cool if we keep that? It's all kind of positioning too. But no, that's not an easy question, but it should be up to the individual. Do they want to really strongly consider their options? But having it done in a vacuum for profit without knowing where it goes and no right to know, hey, what do you have about me? That's what I don't like. Yeah.
You mentioned something about some of the stuff you fill in is not really the right information, or not your information. The other day, I was like, someone said, oh, don't put in your real stuff. I'm like, what do you mean? It's asking me where I was born. And I realized, you're right. Why am I telling them the truth? Like, it doesn't
My Walgreens lady yells at me all the time. She tries to get me to sign up for that card, and I say no. I had it at Dick's Sporting. I end up with a privacy discussion with people at the counters because they don't believe me. They're like, oh, you're one of. I'm like, you don't want to know what I do. You don't want to know. I'm like, and can I just go? And they're like, well, you could save 10%. I'm like, well, I don't want 10%. You're going to make a hell of a lot more out of it, but that's just personal choice. Robert, we've gone up to 1:15. Do you want me to give any instructions? Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.